The Music Room, Part 5. When you think the night has seen your mind, that inside you're twisted and unkind, let me stand to show that you are blind. Please put down your hands, 'cause I see you. Lou Reed. There's a difference between cars and candlesticks. A candlestick is an object with just a top and a bottom. Nothing we would call a left or right side. One side might be incidentally facing us right now, but it has no permanent front or back, or left or right. We do, though, talk as though there is a kind of left and right that is local to some objects, an in-object orientation. A car, for example, has a left and a right side, its left and its right. As a pedestrian, the whole car could be to my left or entirely to my right. It could be facing any direction, north, south, anywhere. Yet even if it were upside down or floating through space, its left and its right would be intact unto itself. These could be perceived and understood as coherent in relation to its own form, independent of a secondary frame of reference. This episode contains images, so it's best to watch on YouTube. The first half. I think I'm beginning to know better what I must mean when I claim that the mirror reverses left and right. Initially, at least, I'm conceiving of what I see in the mirror independently of how it got there. I'm coming to terms with its in-object orientation, assessing it with reference only to itself. When I say that the mirror reverses left and right, I mean that the ring on my left hand appears to be on his right hand. Claiming that the mirror reverses left and right is a claim then about myself, a change I think I witness between pre-reflected me and reflected me. But if I'm getting clearer in the one sense, what do I mean when I say the mirror doesn't reverse up and down? What am I imagining the mirror would do or could show me if it were to reverse my up and down in the same way that I say it reverses my left and my right? A ring is a piece of jewelry. But if I were to wear a crown, for instance, on my head, what would I expect to see? Would I expect somehow that by the process of reflection, the crown would wind up on his feet? It seems as likely that I would end up with shoelaces in my hair. Thinking about it further, even when I stand on the mirror and the mirror puts the crown along with my head at the very bottom of my reflected form, I simply see myself as upside down. There's simply no possibility of confusing my head with my feet, such that I could be convinced, in relation to my own form, that the crown was on my feet. Now that I'm thinking about it, my ring is only plausibly switched from left to right, consequent of the fact that I am left-right symmetric. Left and right, then, are directional terms, words, by which I refer to two completely symmetrical sides of myself. But if I was a creature who was vertically symmetrical, but still called my upside my head and my downside my feet, if I were standing on a mirror, maybe I really could wind up thinking the crown was on my feet. Here's an image of something like a playing card to make the point. It's two-dimensional, of course, but the figure is facing us. We can imagine he's back to front asymmetric, though we can't see his back. Let's start here and see where we can get. If I reflect the card vertically like this, I seem to demonstrate something like the ring changing hands. But in this case, the crown jumps from the top of the form to the bottom. This does seem to show up-down reversal analogous to the left-right reversal I claim happens in relation to my human symmetry. But wait, when I reflect it left to right, the crown is still on top. It doesn't work. Wait a minute. When it was me being reflected, when my ring was apparently on the right hand of my reflected figure, I had two other asymmetric axes by which to deduce my reflection's in-object orientation. What I mean is this. I could work out where my doppelganger's left and right sides, quote, must be, based on where his unmistakable front and back and unmistakable head and feet were. Let's go back a step to be sure we're clear. I think I'm conceiving of myself as something like a six-sided figure, like a car, or to generalize, like a cube. Top, bottom, front, back, left, and right, with its own in-object orientation. But those labels, top, bottom, etc., aren't interrelated in an arbitrary way. Here's an example. If I can label even two non-opposite sides of a cube, say its top and front, all the other labels on all the other sides become inevitable. Bottom opposite top, back opposite front, of course. That's four sides I have. But more importantly, the final two, left and right, become geometrically inevitable, assuming the form's to relate to itself with the expected coherent geometry. Okay, let's go back to the playing card again, which is even more problematic than we've yet realized. When I really think about it, I don't know which way is up and which way is down, even in the pre-reflected form. If he wasn't wearing a crown like this, I can't know whether he's doing a headstand right now or is simply upright. Which is the upper part of his form? How could I know? He's back to front asymmetric, granted, but he's left-right symmetric still. So there's no way to work out, in this case, his top from his bottom, from other clues. We can correct this, though. Let's make him left-right asymmetric. Give him some features that are as unmistakably different as are my head and my feet. Let's see, I'll give him some wings that sprout out his left side. When I say his left, I'm thinking now from a first-person perspective. I'll put a hand on his right with something like a scepter. Good, now he looks fine, like a mad royalist, someone who could fly in circles and proclaim his own rule out of two mouths, a creature that, if he existed on more than just a playing card, might not be unfit to live in Lewis Carroll's lands, or maybe he rules himself, king and subject in one. Let me remind myself of my goal. What am I doing again? I know. I want to make his upside and downside an inevitable consequence of two other asymmetric axes, similar to the way it works for me. Okay, now his left and his right are unconfutable. Consequently, I now know when he's oriented this way, this is his upside. To formalize the rule, when I'm viewing him from the front, his upside will always be a quarter turn clockwise from the scepter that is in his right hand. Now I know when he's doing a headstand and when he's upright. I can track his own in-object orientation regardless of how he's spun around on the screen or in relation to planetary down, the same way I might with the car floating in space. Let's repeat the previous experiment. Flipping him top to bottom does the same thing as last time. If anything, though, it's more compelling. The mirror is flipping him vertically, but even if I forget about that and focus on the consequent form without respect to how he got that way, let's say, not only has the crown moved, but the position of the scepter and the wings confirm the vertical reversal versus his pre-reflected form. What about the experiment that failed last time? Let's try that again. Flipping him this way does what we'd expect. Top and bottom are preserved, left and right reversed, but this time we have a way of working out his orientation in relation to himself, again like the car. If we think back to the upside-down figures, or if we apply the rule that coherently relates left and right sides to top and bottom, we discover that the reflected figure must be upside down. By procedure, the mirror has reversed left and right, yes, but by consequence, judged in object, and provided we hang on to the idea that the scepter is always on his right, the object must have been vertically reversed. He's on his head. It's true. We're failing to take into account the way his in-object geometry has changed consequent of being reflected. But this is precisely what we do in the mirror when we decide it is safe to, quote, work out where our reflections left and right are. And when we say work out, we mean deduce his left and right in object and geometrically from where to us his front and back and head and feet undisputably are. This is the same method we're taking with our playing card creature. We can work things out and discover him to be up, down, reversed. In his strange case, if he could talk, he would ask of himself, why does the mirror always reverse up and down, but never left and right? If he means by reverse left and right that a bracelet on his hand might wind up on his wings, it can't. Yet when he uses wings and hands as consistently named sides to work out his in-object orientation, things always seem to come out the same. Yet if the mirror for him apparently reverses up and down and not left and right, this is a fact about him and not about the mirror. More accurately, it's a fact that combines A, the way we come to terms with the orientation of the object in a mirror, and B, the nature of the object itself. Likewise then, when I say that the mirror reverses left and right, and I mean my left and right, but not up and down, I am not stating a fact about mirrors, but a fact about me, about a form conceived of as six-sided, where only two sides are symmetric, my worked-out left and right, and the other four are asymmetric and unmistakably different. In fact, I must be onto something because standing in an ordinary mirror, I'm told that it does not reverse left and right, but front and back. But of course, no one means by that it can reverse front and back in the same way that I claim it reverses left and right. For example, the bow tie I wear could never end up on my reflection's back. That's not what's meant by reversing front and back. But I know now that if he were front to back symmetric, and if additionally he were asymmetric along the other two axes in a way that compellingly endorsed a conclusion about his front and back, the bow tie certainly could seem to end up on his back. I think we can almost articulate a conclusion. Let's try to state the conclusion in 3 dimensions and a little more rigorously. The second half. This first image shows a 3-dimensional figure conceived of as a 6-sided cube. Left and right sides are labeled from a first-person perspective. Here are 3 possible procedures. This is depicting what the mirror really does in relation to my form and not my interpretation of it. The mirror, of course, always reverses near and far perpendicular to its plane of reflection. But I can position myself at different angles in relation to the mirror. Commonly, I stand in front of it. That's procedure 1. I can also stand with my left or right shoulder to the mirror. In this case, it reverses my forms left and right. That's procedure 2. 3 happens if the mirror is above me or below me. In this final case, it reverses my vertical axis, top, bottom, up, down. Remember that for the letter F, we looked at different angles of reflection. All of these, we concluded, resulted in rotated versions of the same form. It's the same in this case. Yes, the cube might be procedurally back to front reversed, or left-right reversed, or top-bottom reversed. Yet all of these methods of reversal result in rotated versions of a generic outcome, the cube shown in Figure B. Incidentally, Figure B will also cover situations like standing in front of a mirror at a 3/4 angle. It's simply the in-object outcome of reflecting a 6-sided figure. When we talked about the clock, we focused on inter-axis consequences, but we only talked about the x and y axis. What happened to z and x, or z and y? Figure B is a reasonably tidy way to summarize how all 3 in-object axes now interrelate. You'll remember last time we had to contend with the impossible rectangle. This time, though, we get the impossible cube. But in fact, it could also be the 2/3 plausible cube. This is because any 2 of 3 sides pictured might plausibly relate coherently. So this time around, we have 3 interpretation options. If we decide the consequent form is top-bottom and front-back correct, then it must be left-right reversed. If its top and right side are okay, then it must be front-back reversed. Lastly, if its front and right side are correct, then it must be top-bottom reversed. Remember the reflected clock. You can probably see right away that I could, quote, fix it by reversing it left-right, like this. When it's rotated like this, you might be able to see that I could equally fix it by reflecting it vertically. By the way, that would have worked in the original as well. Lastly, remember that the clock was really, by procedure, front to back reversed in the mirror. The right way to fix it then is to reverse it from front to back, which would result in this. It doesn't look fixed because we can't see the front face of the clock, but the writing on the other side is corrected. Everything's fine. But admitting that we can fix it any of these three ways is the same as saying that the two axes we don't fix in each scenario are plausibly correct. One final intuitive way of thinking about this is that the figure can be restored to its pre-reflected geometry, fixed, by passing it through a second mirror. And that happens to be true. We have our complete diagram, the human form conceived of as six-sided, put through the mirror any of three ways, resulting in a generically expressed in-object change, and leaving us with three possible interpretations of what might be, quote, wrong with the reflected figure. Using this diagram, we can restate to ourselves the problem of apparent left-right reversal. When I'm reflected via procedure 1, 2, or 3, I always choose figure C as the interpretation option. I always opt to see my figure as left-right reversed. Even when I recognize it's up-down, I know the ring is on his right hand. But why? Okay, we're ready to state our conclusion. Remember, this applies to three-dimensional objects conceived of as six-sided, having specifically two axes asymmetric and one symmetric. Let's call them 2A, 1S for short. When I see myself or other objects of this type in the mirror, here is what I think I am doing. 1. I look at the object in the mirror in object, that is, independently of how it's gotten that way. I perhaps do not initially consider what the mirror is doing procedurally, but either way, the object, my reflection, presents to me as plausible rather than obviously distorted. This is the first mistake. In a funhouse mirror, I might see myself stretched out with wobbles in the middle or squat and fat. These are obvious distortions. The mirror in my bathroom seems to present me to myself relatively unaltered. But in truth, the reflected form has changed in relation to itself as presented in figure B. It is radically geometrically distorted in relation to itself. 2. Next, to work out the object's own in-object orientation, I begin by locating the object's unmistakable sides. However I stand in relation to the mirror, I locate my reflection's unmistakable front, back, head, and feet. 3. Having established the unmistakable sides, I think I can work out his final two symmetrical sides, as I would for any object on this side of the mirror. That is, as though his geometry had not been distorted, altered by reflection. Importantly, there are three different types of 2A1S figures that we can construct. A figure that is vertically symmetrical, like the playing card, a figure that is front-back symmetrical, like the double piano, or a figure like me, left-right symmetrical. Since the consequent in-object geometry after reflection will always be 2/3 plausible, figure B again, whichever object I view, once I settle on the unmistakable sides, the remaining two sides define the final axis which, quote, must be reversed. This is always the symmetrical axis of the form. In my case, I conclude that I must be left-right reversed in mirrors, an observation I attribute to the mirror itself if I phrase it like this. The mirror reverses my left and right, not my up and down. In summary, we perceive a probable figure, recognize in object its four unmistakable sides, but in sizing up the object as though it were not geometrically distorted, we fail to account for in-object changes resulting from reflection and make a deduction. The final two sides of the now 2/3 probable form, quote, must be the reversed axis. This is why mirrors apparently reverse left and right, but not up and down. Ultimately, certifying the specific details of this conclusion requires a scientific rigor I can't pretend to command or bring to the problem. Less formally, though, it seems to be supported by the fact that we can conceive of other reflected 2A, 1S forms, and that these appear reversed along their specific axis of symmetry, even when this is not left-right. Also, the conclusion necessitates the ability to freely choose which axis might be wrong. This is also supported, this time by the reflected cube's generic in-object geometry. If any axis can fix the figure, then each is conceivably the reversed axis, and we have our pick.
Step a little bit carefully. Be a little bit more pedantic. Everything said should be carefully planned, except for this. Trace your human hand. Hold it up to the light that you let through. This is you. This is you.